Hello, my name is Janice B. Gordon, and this is Scale Your Sales Podcast. Welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, listed number 9 of 43 best podcasts for every sales professional. I am Janice B. Gordon, the customer growth expert, recommended by LinkedIn Sales as one of 15 innovating sales influencers to follow. In today's episode of Scale Your Sales Podcast, my guest rode for 49 days across the Atlantic. He is a serial sales leader and has grown and exited to tech companies. So it was a really interesting conversation talking to him about his founding experience, but particularly when he exited and the kind of remorse you have and having to find yourself again after that. And it's an experience that a lot of founders and people that exit companies have. So you're going to find this really interesting. My next guest is a sales expert, adventurer, and author. He is the CEO and founder of a sales enablement business called Sales Enabla. With a background in sales and business growth, he's grown and sold 2 technological companies. Outside of work, he is equally driven, completed multi-endurance events, including Ironman, swam the English Channel, most recently rode across the Atlantic Ocean. Please welcome to Scale Your Sales Podcast, Matt Garman.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you here. Now, the first question I have for you, Matt, is what makes you such an action man?
I'm an action man. That sounds a bit grand. I've always been a huge fan of adventure. I've always been a huge fan of challenging myself, whether that's business or personal. So yeah, I think it's one of those things. I find it very difficult to switch off and kind of do one with more and one the other. I try to give it all barrels, everything.
Yeah. Well, you certainly did that. You know, rowing a boat over 29 days across the Atlantic. So, what were the biggest lessons for you that you learned about yourself in doing that?
Well, I don't want to be correct. 49 days, unfortunately.
49. What did I say?
You said 29.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
A bit faster than yeah.
That's okay. No, I wished it was 20. There were times when I wished it was 29 days. No, but 49 days. I think what did I learn? I think, well, one of the really interesting things that they tell you when you leave La Gomera, when you first set out, they say it's really, really simple. All you need to do is eat, sleep, row, and repeat. And somebody who'd already rowed the ocean added, when we were on the quayside, they said, and be kind. So I think one of the main things, particularly when you're in a team, is whether that's in business or adventure, is acknowledging other people, particularly in such a thing like an ocean row. You've got to you can't do it alone. So you've got to respect those people and tune into how they're feeling.
Right. So prior to rowing, you didn't do that. Are you saying you weren't as tuned in to how your team and people around you were feeling? So or did you just learn it on a whole different level?
No, I've done some. It's really interesting. I mean, I played rugby competitively for 20 years, which is a team sport. And then a friend of mine roped me into doing triathlon, and I ended up doing Ironman. And I have to admit, I enjoyed the training more than I enjoyed competing, because I realised then that I'm not an individual sports person. I'm very much a small team player. So I think that's evolved over time. And I think what happens is over time you also realise the more events and adventures and also business challenges that you have, you realize where you're probably strong and where you're less strong, and where you need to where you just need to learn things that you may have picked up previously.
So is that why the business environment suits you so well? Because it is a team sport. You know, you're not a lone ranger if you're growing and scaling a company, an organization.
I think current business at the moment, my current business is very small. You know, there's only 3 or 4 of us. In the past, the other businesses we had were slightly larger, or a fair bit larger. But yeah, I really like getting in amongst it, and I like being part of something that feels like, that's got energy and it feels like it's going somewhere. I mean, as part of that, I think you probably, if you're taking a lead in that, you need to be quite forceful, but in the same breath, you also need to consider everyone else that's around you to get to where you want to get to.
So tell me more about growing and selling to technology companies. How did you get involved in that? I'm particularly interested in some of your biggest challenges. So, you know, if you took it, what's the biggest challenge when you started, the biggest challenge when you were growing, the biggest challenge when you're scaling, the biggest challenge when you're exiting? That would be really useful to understand that.
That's plenty of challenges. That's a 24-hour podcast, Janice. No. The first tech business I got involved in, I actually joined as a commission-only salesperson, and then I ended up having a let's call it a difference of opinion with the MD, which resulted in me effectively gambling my house to buy the major share of the company. I learned very early on that I couldn't be. I wanted to be as accommodating as friendly as possible, but I realised that that we needed a lot more guidance and structure in terms of clarity and output. So that was a clear early learning. I had I inherited a couple of members of staff that weren't really playing ball. That was a learning curve, obviously having to deal with those. And I think one of the things that I've learned and somebody taught me is that you kind of, there's no point in getting frustrated and putting up with stuff. I think somebody said to it really quite eloquently once a long time ago. They said, you deserve what you tolerate. And I don't mean that you need to be a taskmaster, but if you want to set out your stall, if you need to make sure that you are the person, at least yourself are adhering to the sort of standards that you want. You know, you can't say one thing and operate in a different way. So I think being and if it's not going how you want it to go, you've got to say it. Otherwise, people quite rightly kind of accept that that's okay. You know, and I think that's one thing that was a definite learning in the first business that I was involved in.
What about the second business? You know, exiting that. What led to that?
Well, we were a very fast growing software business. We were a reseller of another product, but we had quite a lot of intellectual property of our own. And it was probably going to happen anyway. It was a sort of acquisition from them that was highly likely to happen anyway. I learned a lot about that. I learned a lot about the sorts of things that the acquiring business would be interested in. Some of the things that we'd obviously already considered, and some of the other things that perhaps we hadn't considered. They took, you know, it was quite clear to me that yes, we were growing, but they're very interested in the process and the people that we had in our organization, and the ease that they could integrate that into their company. Yeah.
So I wonder, having, you know, been at the front and leading companies and organizations, when that ends and you think kind of what next? This happens to a lot of founders. You're so in it and then you're out of it. Surely there's quite a personal transition that you need to do. I mean, people are used to seeing you at home again and they didn't before. You know, how was that for you?
Horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't mind sharing with it. I mean, I left school and I left home at 16, so I'd only ever worked flat out, really, really hard. And then you're presented with it. You're presented in a situation where somebody gives you what, for me, is a life-changing amount of money for something that you've worked so hard for. And then for about the first month or so, I found myself just in a bit of a daze, kind of happy in a daze. Probably months 2 through to months 4 were horrendous, just in a real sense of a lack of purpose. And, I found myself in a coffee shop at 10 o'clock on a Monday or a Tuesday morning, scratching my head, wondering what I'm going to do. And I've actually spoke to other founders who have done that as well. And it's actually pretty, it's really, really tough, actually. If that situation presented itself again, I think that's definitely something that I would, or if anyone was thinking, moving forward. And I've spoken to a number of people that said, yeah, I'd have plenty of things to do. It's not always that way. It's not always that way. And I was properly borderline depressed. So months 2 to 4 or 5. And what I had the slight buffer in the fact that we sold a business in 2012, and it was and one of my treats to myself was that I spent probably a month going backwards and forwards to London buying myself tickets to the Olympics. So that was my treat.
Yeah. I think this is interesting that, it's almost like there's lots of people that retire and they say, oh, well, I've got lots of things to do, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to do it. My whole house needs rebuilding, but do I really want to do that? I've got lots of things on my list. And I would imagine especially for founders, and we're moving towards exiting, you want to get the highest value and and all of a sudden it stops. I would imagine it's quite typical to go through this kind of depression, very much like a death. You have to kind of mourn the loss of it and find your way back out of it and find purpose again. I would imagine that a lot of people experience that when something that they've loved and grown has been taken away, even if it's they're willingly kind of like selling it and everything.
Oh yeah, totally. I can totally relate to the mourning feeling as well, because it's kind of your thing that you've built and you've nurtured and you've developed. But the other thing that I also realize as well, and perhaps I didn't realize it until a fair bit of time afterwards, is that life's about chapters. And I think there's chapters when we can, I don't know, there's chapters when we're growing up. There's chapters in our teens, maybe. There's chapters in certain stages of work. Exiting might be one of them. There's chapters when we have children. And I think I've started to think a lot more about life in chapters. And I think instead of, if I reflect on it now, instead of thinking, oh, what do I do next? I think there'd be a sense of balance there that say, okay, so that's the end of that chapter. Okay, let's not try and mourn it too much, but let's get closure on it. And now let's think about what the next chapter and excitement may look and feel like.
Yeah. I love that. Reframing it in that way. Rather than living in the darkness of it all, using it as leverage to move forward. I'm really interested, kind of switching back to sales, because I know you've got tons of experience in sales, but sales is related to business and business growth, so it's great that we've kind of talked about your unique experience there as well. But I know I have your book.
Oh wow. Thank you.
So yeah, I've started reading. Only got it last week. So yeah, I'm kind of working through it. So I know that you talk about the four pillars, and so let's just start first of all in terms of the strategies that you use to optimize your sales team. You wouldn't have been able to have sold companies unless you kind of worked through many of those pillars that you've put in the books and optimize your sales and sales team. So tell me more about that.
I think one of the things I'm very one of the things that I quite often get asked if I'm speaking with a client or I'm speaking at an event, or somebody would approach you and they'd say, "Oh, Matt, I've got a real issue with this, or I've got an issue with that in the sales." And my typical response is, well, okay, well, what's in the playbook? What does the playbook say? And people look at you blankly when you refer to a playbook. And to me, and we all see things and consume things in different ways. And unless things are documented, I can try and describe something to you, Janice, and with my best will in the world, I may not describe it in the way that you interpret it. So for me, it's about distilling those thoughts. It's a bit dull at times, but it's documenting it, it's structuring it, and it's actually bringing it into a living and breathing thing, if that makes sense. And the simplest way I can describe that is I stumbled into sales when I was about 21, and it was really, really quite simple. I didn't have any qualifications. I still don't, by the way. So sales offered an opportunity for me to earn more money. And I stumbled into sales and worked for a life insurance company, and it was commission only. So it was pretty hard yards. We did about 200 cold calls a day. But, and here's the point, it came with 8 weeks of training. Now, okay, I appreciate that was quite some time ago, but it was a commission-only role, and it came with 8 weeks of training. So at the beginning, there was an intake of 80, and at the end of the 8 weeks, there was an outtake of 8. So a lot of people quit, a lot of people didn't make it, and so on and so forth. But what happened is, and somebody's obviously done the maths, but what happened is at the end of that process, those 8 that went out into the field, you know, they had the playbook, they had the binder, they had the collateral, they almost had the cap and the badge and everything else to go with it. But if you were to sit in a meeting with your manager at the time, they would be very confident that you would be able to articulate the proposition, be able to handle the objections in exactly the same way that somebody else in another town or another county or even, you know, somewhere else further afield would do. And to me, that's the value of laying the foundation for something that you can build upon. Because, you know, once you've done it, once you can iterate it and build it, and then when new recruits come into the organization, it's a much faster method of onboarding.
When I started in sales, I mean, I didn't have 8 weeks of training, but probably a good 4 weeks after a fashion. We got taken over by, I was in financial services. So very kind of similar environment. And I remember, you know, I had to get in on a Tuesday, 8 o'clock cold calling and 7 o'clock at night on a Tuesday. Hated Tuesdays because that was early and late cold calling. And yeah, we all had the playbook and the process. I wonder if that would work now, you know, because so much have changed. At that point, we had all the information and we would ask the questions, and the questions were leading people to our solution. And that's how it was designed. Whereas now, buyers have all the information, not only internally what's important to them, but, you know, they do so much research. They're already 70% through the sales process often before they're willing to have a conversation with a real live salesperson. And so I wonder how much of that would work now, because the environment's changed so much.
Well, my simple answer to that is all of it. And the reason I say that is because, and I agree with you about the amount of consumption prior to a salesperson entering the conversation. But the reason I would say to that, and probably even reinforce it now, is they've gone 70% down the process before they've picked the phone up. You absolutely have to be tip-top now at that point moving forward. Otherwise, you're going to drop a ball. So I would say it's absolutely critical. But I think and I spend a lot of time with people talking about process and sales, what's the sales flow and all those sorts of things. But I think, if at 70% of the process, the salesperson enters the room, they have to be tip top. They have to know everything in the playbook. They have to be really, really good at what they've got to do. And then the other thing they've got to do is they've got to be exceptional at doing their discovery. Because for me, that's where it kind of starts or potentially ends for the salesperson. So I think that's for me, that's the most important part.
So if they're 70% through the process, the buyer's gone way past discovery, the salesperson, it's relatively new. And if they start at discovery at that point, are they pulling the buyer back, or are they doing the buyer a service? So they're thinking, okay, I've been on your website, I've watched your demo, I know enough about your product to invite you into the conversation. And then the salesperson comes in and they start collecting data. How does the buyer feel about that when they're thinking, I've gone way past that, you're on catch up?
Okay, no, I wouldn't say that from a data capture perspective. One of the first things you would understand with that discovery process is how much research have you done as a salesperson before you've even picked up the phone, set the meeting up or whatever. So you absolutely need to be at least where they are in their thought process. But what I think when I talk about the discovery in terms of, I'm thinking very much more about the physical questions and the tactics that you would do there to reinforce the thought process that the client's going through. They've obviously collated more than just your information. They've collated information from a whole raft of other sources as well. So part of that discovery process, in my eyes, is actually dissecting that, and almost not in a structured consultative way, challenge where they've got their thought process to up to now. And then it's actually having a much more of a consultative conversation with them to understand where they are, understand where they're trying to get to, and then it's probably a little bit more of a meeting of minds and saying, okay, so I understand where you are, you understand. Now, what I need to do is I now need to understand a little bit more about maybe what your process is going to be moving forward, who's going to be involved, what's their involvement in this, and start thinking about taking them towards their ideal outcome as much as anything else as well. So I think it's a lot more than just, you'd never want to be playing catch up, because you basically look an arse.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
But it amazes me how often there's an awful lot of organizations that I meet, and they've still got that sales and marketing, what's the word? Divide, I would say sometimes, and I'm horrified. So I think if you're really up against, if sales and marketing aren't working in harmony, then you've got real issues. So that goes both ways. That means, to me, that means the marketing briefing, digesting information from sales in the end. It means then briefing sales on what's coming up, what's the campaign strategies, what's the information that's going out into the public domain, how we're presenting ourselves and articulating it in our marketing activities. And it's for the salespeople to actually maintain a bloody good interest in that and actually be tip top and completely up to speed as to what's going on in that activity, so that it genuinely is a joined up operation.
Yeah.
I've seen too many times when it's, oh, well, we got, you're on the phone now, so and it's like, no, it has to be a seamless operation.
Yeah, yeah. And, customers are gathering information from multi channels, and the decision-making team is often more than one person, and some of them are completely unknown to you. So that discovery process is really important, just to find out, as you say, where the customer is in their decision and who's involved in that decision. So I absolutely get that. So tell me more.
And I think, sorry,
yeah,
just to add to that, and I think crafting the questions whereby, we can all look at past, methodologies and abbreviations in terms of qualification tools and scales, but ultimately we want to be clever and tactical in our questioning and our questioning skills, so that instead of asking linear binary questions, we're asking high quality questions that we know are going to give us, maybe 2 or 3 threads of information, as opposed to just a single binary thread. I mean, we've all been in situations before where a call's not gone well. We ask a question, they give us an answer. We ask a question, they give us an answer. We ask a question, and nobody's going anywhere, and they feel frustrated, and everyone wants to get off the phone as quickly as possible. But conversely, if you've put together well thought through, well crafted questions, then what happens, and where you're actively looking for 2, 3, or even 4 snippets of information, we've been in there where it's a good question, and sometimes, and you've come up with a good question, and a client's, you don't have to do anything other than take notes for the next 2 minutes, because the client's become a lot more forthcoming with the information, because you've given them a great, probing output.
Yeah. Is it Einstein that said, if I had a minute to solve a problem, that I'd take, 59 minutes to work out the questions?
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, absolutely.
Someone said that,
Yeah, I spend a lot of time mapping what good questions would be at various stages.
Yeah. My mentor said to me, I've got several mentors, but said to me, there's only 3 questions. Have you heard that before? You only ever ask 3 questions, not in sales, but in life. And if you craft those 3 questions really well, then you get all the information you want. And especially in sales, traditionally, it's like they, as you say, you've got this kind of binary: ask a question, get an answer, ask a question, and everyone's bored of it, and buyers know where you're leading them to. But if you can hone it down to only 3 really well, I call them strategic open questions, but they're personalized to who you're on the phone with or who you're in front of. 3 questions should be able to get you everything that you need if you've structured them well.
Yeah, they definitely open up the vast majority of the opportunity or conversation.
Yeah, because nowadays no one has time. A 30-minute call is now down to, you're lucky if you get 10 minutes. So you've got to be really clever with people's times and plan it well, as you say. All right, so.
But I think also just on the time perspective as well. I've been to meetings before in the past, and I was in a meeting with a client in London, and I was doing some work with the sales team, and the CEO said to me, "Oh, so we've got a pitch coming in for a new website. Do you want to sit in on it?" And I said, "Yeah, no worries. I'm here if you value my input and it's useful to you, I'll do it." And it was, I couldn't believe it. I knew, because I'd been there, that the CEO had an hour, and I looked at my watch, 44 minutes in to the meeting, and the person responsible for talking about the website was still talking about their company and their product, And then it got towards the time, so they didn't ask I didn't ask how long they had in the meeting, so they had 16 minutes to rush through. Needless to say, they didn't get the business. But it's just, you know, simple things. And I think those are the sorts of things sometimes that we learn because we're taught. And sometimes, sadly, we learn because we cocked it up a little bit before in the past. And I think, well, I won't make that mistake again.
Absolutely. And there's a colleague of mine, and she gives her clients these T-shirts, and it's written upside down. It's not about you. So when you look down, you can read it. So it's back to front to everyone. It's not about you. Yeah, which is brilliant. All right, so I'm going to change this up a little bit. If you're on a desert island on your own, what's the one thing you would take with you?
Well, apart from the obvious, being follically challenged and being a baseball cap, I think one of the things that I've never been a huge music fan. I don't know why. I mean, I like music, but I'm not one of these people that always got music on. One of the things that I realized when we were rowing, and I actually wrote a blog about it when we came back, was I didn't realize quite how much music impacted my mood. So I would definitely take a playlist of an extended playlist of relatively upbeat music. Having said that, as happened on the Atlantic Row, it's a long time, and even then you're repeating the same old stuff for quite a long time. So it depends on how long I'm going to be stuck on this desert island, to be honest with you, Janice.
But that's interesting to how music can affect your mood. I think that's quite interesting in how we get through challenges in our lives, and how we can pull on these tools to help to rebalance the situation we're in at the moment, or to take us out of the situation we're in at the moment. Well,
there's I'll give you 2 or 3 examples of some quite interesting tune playlists from the Atlantic. One of my son, I gave my son the task of building my playlist for the row, and he didn't want me to do the row. And there's a song, I think he's an Australian singer, and I had it on shuffle, and it came. So there's an Australian singer called Dean Lewis, I think, and on the first night it came on, and it's a song called "How Do I Say Goodbye," and it was like, oh man,
oh gosh.
So that wasn't particularly helpful. But one of the other, there's another one. There was a song from the script that I listened to. If You Can See Me Now. I lost my dad during lockdown, so that's a really good. That was it was at times it's up, sometimes it's down. And then there's another one I had, which was an Eminem song, and I can't remember. I don't know the name of it. And it starts with the line, or relatively early on in the first line, and it's going back to the point that you made about your experiences or we spoke about chapters.
Yeah.
I realized I had to go to that place in order to get to this place.
Right. I
can't remember the name of the song, but it's
that is a great quote as well, isn't it?
Totally.
I might put that in my office, actually. Yeah. So my very last one is, what are the secrets to a successful life then?
I don't know. Answers on a postcard. No. I try not to, and I am not great at it, but I try not to take myself that seriously. I think you need to laugh a lot. And I think the older I've got as well, I've got a little bit more philosophical, and I think if you give more than you take, then you've got a feeling of I'm being a decent human here, and I don't think that's a bad place to. Be, because I think mentally, and you'd argue spiritually, that's a nice place to be. And I think the other thing as well, and I learned this from reading Jordan Peterson's book. Stop, and it is judge yourself by the person you were yesterday, not by someone else today.
Interesting.
So I think we all, particularly, we've got too much in our faces these days, and I think what we do is we're all very, particularly with social media, it's like, I don't know if it's jealousy or I wish, all this fear of missing out and all that sort of stuff. And I think if we sit back and go, do you know what, I actually made some progress today, so I'm better off than I was yesterday, and I'm probably a better person than I was yesterday, as opposed to comparing ourselves over here.
Yeah.
Looking at ourselves, I think that's not a bad place to kind of to keep your head.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And it makes me think of what you said when you were stepping onto the boat, be kind.
Oh, totally. I don't know. I don't know whether a 20-year-old Matt Garman would say that. But definitely a 50-something Matt Garman says that.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's all I need to hear, Matt Garman. Thank you so much for being a guest on Scale Your Sales podcast. I've learned more about you, and I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Scale Your Sales podcast. If you like this discussion, feel free to listen to other episodes or watch the captioned show on YouTube and subscribe to future episodes. I would really appreciate it if you would leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you.